problems between nations or international issues. For at least over 3,000 years, it has been held as axiomatic that war is the only feasible arbiter between nations. That is to say, if there are problems between nations, the only way it can be solved is through war. And in war, of course, as everybody knows, might is right. So whichever country manages to defeat the other or inflict maximum destruction and devastation on the other is widely held to be on the right side. The vanquished is assumed to be on the wrong side. People don't realize that this crude notion goes back several centuries to the time when people were actually considered barbaric. So historically speaking, I have no hesitation in saying that this excessive, almost blind, fanatical faith in the efficacy of violence in solving international relations is a residue of the barbaric phase through which humanity evolved over a long period of time. It's an interesting fact to remember that even as we outgrow certain phases and conditions of human life and human nature, we do not effect a total break with the past. Rather, we carry within us certain residual elements that survive from the past as an integral part of our nature. That's why I often feel that human nature is like a palimpsest. Palimpsest is a surface on which succeeding generations write their stories or leave their impressions. Palimpsest. It's a beautiful metaphor. So, even though we are living in the so-called civilized phase of our species, the fact is that we carry within ourselves the old hunter, and therefore whenever a human being is hounded or hunted, irrespective of our ethical feelings or cultural notions or juridical norms, we experience a deep delight in that fact. That's one of the reasons why we take a lot of interest, in fact, embarrassing interest, in the conduct of war at a distance. We don't want to be inconvenienced or hurt by war in our vicinity, but war happening at a distance in which one people is chased by another, or one country is attacked and mauled by another, or both countries try to inflict upon each other maximum destruction and cruelty, is felt by us as some kind of legitimate form of entertainment. I'm embarrassed to have to say this, but that is a fact. In fact, the credit for turning war into television entertainment, or pioneering this entertainment, must go to CNN, which used the opportunities afforded by the American misadventure in the Middle East, going back to 1991, lasting up to 1993, as superb television entertainment. And it's not the time for me to go into the details thereof. So the point I want to make is this, that a delight in the conduct of war reporting, the various claims and counterclaims made in the context of war, our deep delight in reading reports about how and with what stratagems a war has been prosecuted, and the scale on which bloodshed has been accomplished, the number of lives in their prime snuffed out, the extent of damage of property inflicted on the so-called enemy. All this bespeaks of that very substantial element of barbarity that still is operative in our nature. We are civilized barbarians. We are very civilized on the externals or on the outside. We are very barbaric on the inside. This is a reality about human nature we need to come to terms with. So, it happens as everybody knows, that is extremely rewarding and profitable to create relationships of malevolent hostility between nations, and it yields assured immense political rewards. I'll come to that in a short while from now. So, the first thing I want to share with my friends in this fellowship of minds is that there is something barbaric about the modern tendency to gloat, which has always been there, but it's becoming more and more evident. Tendency to gloat in the exercise of violence and in professing blind faith in the efficacy of violence. It proves that we are at heart, in our line of thinking, we are still barbarians. This is something that we have to remember. Now, the hallmark of this kind of barbarity is faith in the old dictum, might is right. So, for example, today, whatever Putin says is the right thing, and whatever Zelensky says is wrong because Zelensky is perceived to be weaker than Putin. There is therefore a marked difference between the way Trump treats Putin and the way Trump treats Zelensky. Trump would not dare to treat Putin the way he treats Zelensky. All that is in our public view, right in front of us. And therefore, fortunately for me, I don't have to go on explaining this. Now, what you see in all of this is this blind faith in violence. The second point I want to make is exactly the point that interrogates us. I challenge all of my viewers to find out just one instance during a historical span of, let's say, 2,000 years or 3,000 years, one instance in which the use of violence has actually solved a problem. By solved, I mean not bring about a temporary change, cosmetic change, but radical changes towards abolishing that very pattern of the problem. I have undertaken this exercise, and I have to tell you that I have not found any. Let's consider some of the recent examples. All of us still remember the 10-year-old bloody war between Iraq and Iran. More than 1 million people died, and the war was fought for the possession of a small island, a small stretch of land. After 10 years of bloodshed, after sacrificing more than 1 million lives, after suffering unspeakable agony, loss of life and property, both the countries were back to square one. No country gained any advantage, and it was a tragic waste of precious life and resources. Now think of the heroic American involvement in Vietnam with the professed intention of containing and, if possible, eradicating the influence of communism. What happened? 50,000 Americans perished in Vietnam. More than 1.5 million Vietnamese perished. The very ecology of the country changed because of the excessive use of bombs, explosives, napalms, that's incendiary bombs, carpet bombing, etc., etc. Has America achieved anything? Has any problem been solved? Not at all. Now think of Afghanistan. Soviet Union tried its level best to solve the problem there by might, accepted defeat, retreated. America moved in that space and repeated the same mistake, and finally withdrew from Afghanistan a couple of years ago. Has America solved any problem there using violence? Not at all. India and Pakistan, the partition, that was punctuated by the massive outbreak of violence, communal riots, in which reportedly 2 million people perished. Has that bloodshed resulted in solving any of the problems? No, the problem still lingers. Take any example you want. You certainly will not come across a single instance in the long span of history in which violence helped human beings to solve a problem. Violence may have helped people in bringing about mechanical and superficial changes, but problems remain and no problem has been solved. And this is something That is as clear as noonday to me. Now, the third point. It is not that this obvious, simple, glaring fact is not unknown to the policy pundits and strategists of the world. Everybody knows this. Everybody knows that violence is a problem and not the solution. Then, therefore, the question arises, and that's the most interesting question. Why is it that in spite of this being a manifest fact, namely the fact that violence does not help solve any problem, rather violence is in itself the problem, in spite of knowing this only too well, why is it that the nations of the world still continue to repose their absolute faith in violence? In fact, every country invests a disproportionate portion of its national income in accumulating lethal weapons. In fact, the pride of a nation or the respect that a nation commands among the community of nations in the world is directly proportionate to the lethal nature of its arsenal. America is respected, Russia is respected, now China is being respected, not because these countries are more moral than any other country, including the most backward countries in Asia and Africa. The only reason they are respected is that they are superpowers, that is to say, they have incalculable powers of destruction, therefore they are respected. Now, therefore, this takes us back to the point I made earlier, that despite our claim to have become a civilized people, the old barbaric element still survives and rules us from within, and that element of civilized barbarity is this blind faith in violence. Now, the final question. Given all that I have hinted so far, in spite of knowing, that is, that violence is the problem and not the solution, in spite of the obvious historical fact that we can't really pinpoint a single instance in which violence has enabled us to solve a single problem, and in spite of the proven fact that blind faith in violence only makes the human condition worse in multiple ways day after day, why is it that the best among us, the so-called pride of the flock, the intellectuals of the world, the pundits of the world, the wise men of the world, refuse to abandon their blind faith in violence? And that's the heart of my argument. Here, I have to say that the reasons for this are psychological, political, and economic. First, the psychological, which I've already hinted in our journey so far, namely that the ability to unleash violence, thereby inflicting dramatic and frightening pain, cruelty, and suffering on those we are pleased to consider our enemies, is a psychological satisfaction which goes to the very root of the barbarity that lies at the bottom of our nature. When it comes to the more pressing issues, it's the barbaric element and not the rational element that comes to the fore as far as human nature is concerned. And therefore, societies that are underdeveloped, or societies in which a majority of the members languish in a state of resentment and a sense of underprivilege, frustration, etc., they fall an easy prey to the propaganda, valorizing, romanticizing, and exalting violence. And they are dished out a deadly cocktail of entertainment and false euphoria by all kinds of reporting about the violence and cruelty inflicted on the supposed victim. Now, for example, every Indian and every Pakistani feels himself or herself fulfilled, irrespective of his or her material circumstances, the struggles of life, when he or she reads the report that through this war or this confrontation, extreme violence and maximum destruction has been inflicted on the so-called enemy out there. Nobody stops and ponders even for a moment as to how this is going to help him or her in any practical way. Nobody is interested in this. Here I have to point out an interesting streak in human nature. Perhaps this has come to your notice as well. The human nature, for whatever reasons, attaches more value, more importance to things that are of no use whatsoever. For example, nobody ever gains by indulging in gossip. But people who claim that they have no time to watch a video which contains deep thinking even for 10 minutes will have 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours to gossip. Though gossip benefits no one, whereas seeing a video containing some profound truths, insights could benefit. Likewise, people who claim to be too busy to attend to anybody in their needs will spend 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours in clubs playing cards. I don't know if anyone has ever gained anything meaningful by playing cards. But there's absolutely no limit on the time that a person is willing to invest in playing cards. Take any illustration of this kind that you can think of. Even think of buying expensive items of art. We know that MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, spent $400 million to buy or to auction, buy through auction, a piece of art, Renaissance art. Now, that's not going to be of any material use to anyone. So I can go on multiplying instances, perhaps it's not necessary. As a rule, people value more what is of no real use to them. Whereas what is of practical use to them, they tend to belittle and neglect. Now, violence, faith in violence is again something that expresses the same streak in human nature. So the first point I'm making is that in spite of the proven facts that the use of violence or reposing faith in violence gives us absolutely no relief or return of any kind, there is a continued reassertion of faith, reiteration of faith in violence for psychological reasons, as I've just now mentioned. Now look at the political reason. In every society throughout the ages, those who wanted to be politically popular have always used violence. They would, if there are no enemies, they would invent enemies and direct all possible violence towards them in order to create this false euphoria that by kicking your enemy, you get some kind of fulfillment. Now, this is purely hallucinatory. It is purely delusional. There's absolutely no basis in facts. Even if you kick for 10 years all your enemies routinely and kick them to your heart's satisfaction, this is not going to benefit you by as much as a piece of straw. And this is a fact. But this fact will not be recognized by us. And if anyone makes a mention of it in situations like this, it incurs the risk of being stigmatized as anti-national. So it is politically profitable to repose faith in violence. Now let me deal with the third aspect of it, which is economical. Violence in this world, and its foremost manifestation called war, does not rage just like that. It rages because it is locked into, or it is in sync with, the brutal economic interests of a very powerful lobby called the International Military Industrial Complex, complemented with the arms mafia. The International Military Complex and the arms mafia. It is not in their interest for peace to prevail for any period of time. Rather, it is imperative for their very survival to provoke regional conflicts so that their products can be consumed and their profits assured. So this is what I call uh, human sacrifice in the secular context. In olden days, there was human sacrifice in relation to religion. Now, human sacrifice has been, for all practical purposes, abolished, eradicated from religion. But it thrives in the domain of politics and economics. N number of people, thousands and thousands of people, can be sacrificed at the altar of the vested interests of the arms dealing elite, the international military complex. Now, it's very obvious that politics is inevitably and inextricably entwined with the interests of the international military industrial complex. For example, President Donald J. Trump's recent visit to the three Gulf states was largely aimed at pushing arms sale. Saudi Arabia alone has ordered, apart from military equipment, 200 Boeing jets. Now, that of course is not for violence, but for aviation. But the overall package includes a military pact as well, details of which have not been revealed. The same with the understanding formed with the government of Qatar, and now the last leg, which is UAE, beginning with I forget the name. Okay, UAE. So there is a commitment to provoking and perpetuating armed conflicts in order to ensure a large enough, sufficient market for whatever the international military industrial complex produces in various parts of the world. Now, the recent standoff between India and Pakistan was admirably used by China to showcase its military prowess, and that's bound to have tremendous economic spin-off for China, as we can well imagine. And this is something that has sent shockwaves through even America. Both America and Russia will have reasons to sit up and think about where they are in relation to China. Now, the basic issue is economics as to who gains from a war, etc., etc. It's been a part of American history that so far, from every armed conflict, America has emerged as the gainer. The American international prominence was ensured by the Second World War. And therefore, America, the American culture, the American foreign policy is quite explicitly predicated on creating international tensions and intervening here, there, and everywhere. Fortunately, this indiscriminate participation in regional conflicts has so depleted the American energy that today the Americans are left with no gumption to get involved. Therefore, now the most popular statement is that the American boots will not be on the ground anywhere. Whereas that was not the case with Vietnam, that was not the case with the Middle East, that was not the case with Afghanistan, so on and so forth. So obviously, America has got a bloody nose and has now realized that it is not possible to go tinkering with the affairs of others based on this creed of violence. So the long and short of all that I've shared with you through this video is this, that it is promotive of the interests of the ruling elite all over the world. It's not confined to just one country, to promote this blind, uncritical faith in violence. Whereas the consequences thereof go against the interests of the common man. From every armed conflict, the poor peoples of the nations in conflict emerge poorer, more deprived, more helpless, and more harassed, more exploited. The actual economic burden of waging war falls more on the common people and the poor people than on the rich. The top economic elite of every country knows how to thrive through conflicts and warmongering, whereas the burden of waging war falls upon the common people. It is against their interest. And therefore, at least by way of enlightened self-interest, we should refuse to be co-opted into this most absurd and hypocritical exercise of romanticizing war and violence, as though that is the ultimate panacea for all the problems that we face. The simple fact, let's remind ourselves once again, is that violence has not solved a single problem on a satisfactory, enduring basis ever. Rather than violence being a solution to our problems, violence is the problem, the archetypal problem, and all of the problems issue one way or another from our blind faith in violence at all levels, from the macro level to the micro level of interpersonal relations. And therefore, if we have any sense at all, we will certainly realize that our interest lies not in spreading a culture of violence, but a culture of compassion, a culture of love, a culture of brotherhood. And in fact, this has been the core spiritual agenda in every spiritual tradition worth naming. Fortunately, India has been home to the birth of several spiritual traditions, though unfortunately, these spiritual traditions do not inform our perception, our outlook, our priorities, the way we understand reality and manage them. Rather, distorted concoctions erected in their names, almost every one of them animated by blind faith in violence, which contradicts the core spiritual conviction in all the religious traditions that India has seen the birth of. They now hold the field, they now rule the roost, and we are paying the price for it. If tomorrow, just think of it, if tomorrow a leader comes across and says that rather than hate Pakistan, which you have tried long enough and found to be not very helpful, let's try and build good relations with Pakistan. After all, people on that that side of the line and this side of the line, we're all human beings, as Shakespeare says in The Merchant of Venice. We have the color of our blood is the same. We all have the same background as human beings. We have the same deep structure of experience. What we share in common is far greater than what separates us or marks us as different. And also the spiritual insight. That is a sign of pettiness, that sign of cheapness, to see people only in terms of differences, shutting our eyes willfully against the huge substratum of shared features, shared interests, shared patterns of experience. Ultimately, despite our superficial differences, we are, in a deep and profound sense, we are one. That's the heart of the Hindu spiritual philosophy. And I hope and pray that at least those who love Hinduism would come forward at this time and give effect in practical terms to the profundity of the Advaita philosophy as applicable to nation building at the present time. Jai Hind.